What is the Volunteer Management Systems Toolkit? PNVSCA commissioned DevConcepts to develop a practical, user-friendly toolkit. Hence, we have the Volunteer Management Systems or VMS Toolkit, which is the first ever publication of PNVSCA for volunteer managers. It is intended for organizations that implement volunteer programs and manage volunteers. The toolkit is also for the use of PNVSCA volunteer service officers and other volunteer management practitioners, like the government, academe, corporate, and non-for-profit organizations. It uses the volunteer management cycle as the main framework and delves into the processes and tools in volunteer management. Every individual component is related, but independent of each other. Users can choose and pick the component that is applicable for their volunteer program. So, what's in the volunteer management cycle? The VMS cycle is composed of 8 key components, namely strategy development, partnership development, program planning, volunteer recruitment, volunteer mobilization, volunteer support, volunteer monitoring, assignment completion. Let's discuss them one by one. The first component, strategy development, involves the development of a strategic plan on how to engage volunteers for community development projects or initiatives. For example, capacity building, livelihood development, healthcare, education, disaster response. Volunteer programs should have a clear direction of where it is headed, how it is getting there, and for what purpose. A well-written and clearly articulated volunteer program strategy is an essential communication tool any volunteer manager can use when advocating or promoting a program to various stakeholders. It should answer 3 questions. Why are we implementing the program? What do we hope to achieve and by when? How will we do it? The second component is partnership development. This looks into processes and principles related to partner identification, partnership building, and relationship building. The important principles in partnership development are having the right partner that is aligned to your organization, goals, objectives, and core values, and ensuring the partner is suitable with minimal to no risk. The third component is program planning. This is about developing an activity or project plan for volunteer-related initiatives. It outlines the activity objectives and work plan, as well as the requirements to successfully implement the activity. A program plan or volunteer activity must address the following questions. What is the volunteer activity that will be undertaken? How will the volunteer activity contribute to the VPS? What will it achieve? What will be the potential outcomes? What will be the volunteer's outputs? What tasks will the volunteer perform? What resources are needed to successfully implement the activity? The fourth component of the volunteer management cycle is volunteer recruitment. This focuses on the processes and management practices necessary in recruiting the right volunteers. It includes the development of assignment descriptions, selection criteria, and undertaking of due diligence in volunteer selection. Volunteer recruitment comprises of 2 key criteria: skills required to complete the assignment and attitude needed to accomplish the assignment objectives. The fifth component is volunteer mobilization, which looks at the processes related to the mobilization of volunteers, especially with regard to developing and running an effective pre-deployment training or orientation for volunteers. Key components of volunteer mobilization are pre-deployment orientation or training of volunteers, travel or transportation and logistical arrangements, locality risk assessment and emergency management planning, safety and security briefing for volunteers, health and medical checks, provision of necessary information to relevant stakeholders to prepare them for the volunteers' deployment. The sixth component of VMS is volunteer support. This focuses on aspects related to the support and management of volunteers on assignment, including allowances, incentives and benefits, communication and feedback, safety and security, and emergency management. Volunteer support systems should consider the following: welfare support and assignment support. The seventh is volunteer monitoring. Monitoring in the volunteer management concept can mean two things. Monitoring as a process of collecting information related to your volunteer program for the purpose of evaluation. Monitoring as a task of keeping track of volunteers. Monitoring as a process refers to the discipline of capturing relevant data on how your program contributed to strategic goals and objectives. Monitoring as a task has to do with putting in place practices to keep track of volunteers on assignment in terms of assignment progress and well-being. And finally, the eighth component of the VMS cycle is assignment completion. It includes the processes related to volunteer assignment completion, which includes the conduct of exit interviews, as well as granting of awards and recognition. In this phase, every volunteer manager must learn from the volunteer's experience. And there you have it, the 8 key components of the volunteer management cycle. In essence, these are what makes up the contents of the VMS toolkit.